The night my wife publicly humiliated me, she thought I was the biggest loser at the table. She had no idea I was the reason the restaurant had survived, and when the owner walked over and called me, "Sir," the smile disappeared from her face. "My name is Daniel Carter. I was 38, married to Melissa for 11 years, and until that night, I honestly believed our marriage was worth saving." Melissa had just been promoted to regional director at a medical equipment company in Chicago. She'd worked hard for it. Or at least, that's what I thought. So I booked a private dining room at one of the most expensive restaurants downtown. I wanted the evening to be about her, not me, not my job, not the sacrifices I'd made over the years. Just her. Melissa invited 6 coworkers, her boss, and 2 friends from college. I smiled, shook hands, and stayed quiet while everyone congratulated her. Then one of her coworkers asked, "So Daniel, what do you do?" Before I could answer, Melissa laughed. "He's just here for the free food." The table exploded with laughter. I felt my face burn. I looked at her. She didn't even apologize. Instead, she leaned toward her friend and whispered, loudly enough for me to hear, "Daniel's between things right now." That wasn't true. I'd left my corporate consulting position 8 months earlier, but I hadn't been sitting around. I'd been building something. Something I deliberately kept private. Because I wanted Melissa to believe I was simply taking time to figure out my next move. I swallowed my pride. "Congratulations, Melissa," I said. She smiled. "Thanks, honey." Then the restaurant owner walked through the door. His name was Frank Delaney. He was a 60-year-old Chicago businessman who had owned the restaurant for nearly 30 years. He stopped beside our table. His eyes immediately landed on me. Then his expression changed. "Mr. Carter?" The room went quiet. Frank smiled. "Sir, your usual table is ready whenever you'd like." Melissa's smile vanished. "Your usual table?" I stood slowly. "Frank." He looked around the room. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were dining with guests tonight." Melissa stared at me. "You know the owner?" Frank laughed. "Know him?" He looked genuinely confused. "Daniel saved this place." Nobody moved. Melissa's eyebrows tightened. "What does that mean?" Frank pulled out a chair. "2 years ago, when we nearly went under, Daniel helped us restructure our debt. He refused to let us close." Melissa stared at me. "You did what?" I didn't answer. Frank continued. "He also invested in the restaurant." Someone at the table whispered, "How much?" Frank smiled. "Enough to become our majority partner." Silence, silence. Melissa's face went pale. Her boss slowly lowered his glass. "You own this place?" I shook my head. "Not exactly." Frank corrected me. "He owns 61%. Melissa looked like she'd been slapped, but she wasn't done. She leaned toward me and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" I finally looked directly into her eyes. "Because every time I tried to talk about what I was building, you told me I wasn't successful anymore." Her lips parted. She remembered. 6 months earlier she'd told me, "I'm tired of explaining to people that my husband is taking a career break." I had never forgotten those words. But there was something else she didn't know, and that was why I had chosen this restaurant. I reached into my jacket and placed a small envelope on the table. Melissa stared at it. "What is that?" "Open it." Her hands trembled as she pulled out the papers. Her eyes moved across the first page, then the second. Her face changed. "What is this?" Her boss leaned forward. I said quietly, "Your company has been buying equipment from a supplier I own." Melissa looked at me. "No. Yes. You're the supplier?" I nodded. For the past year, I'd quietly built a medical logistics company. And 3 months earlier, Melissa's company had signed a massive distribution contract with it. But there was something she didn't know. Her promotion had been partly based on the success of that contract. The room became unbearably quiet. Melissa looked at the documents again. "Why would you do this?" I answered honestly. "Because I believed in you." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought if I stayed out of your way, you'd finally have room to succeed." She shook her head. "Daniel." "But somewhere along the way," I continued, "you stopped seeing me as your husband." Nobody laughed now. I told her about the nights I'd waited for her to come home, the birthdays she'd missed, the conversations she'd dismissed, the way she'd started introducing me as my husband, Daniel, instead of simply Daniel. Then came the final blow. I looked at her boss. "There's one more thing." He frowned. "What?" "I terminated the supplier agreement this morning." Melissa froze. "What?" Her boss stood. "You did what?" "The contract expires tonight." Her promotion depended heavily on that account. Without it, the numbers she'd presented to the board no longer existed. Her boss looked at her. "You knew about this?" Melissa shook her head violently. "No." He turned back toward me. "Why terminate it?" I looked at Melissa. "Because I finally realized I shouldn't have to financially support someone who publicly treats me like I'm worthless." Melissa started crying. Not the angry kind, the quiet kind. The kind that comes when someone realizes they may have destroyed something they can never rebuild. She reached across the table. Daniel, please. I stood. I didn't bring you here to punish you. She looked up. Then why? Because this was supposed to be your celebration. I paused. And I wanted one last night where I could pretend we were still the people who fell in love. That broke her. She covered her face. For the first time that night, nobody cared about the promotion. Nobody cared about the restaurant. Nobody cared about money. They were watching a marriage collapse in real time. I walked outside into the cold Chicago night. Melissa followed me. Daniel. I stopped. She stood beneath the restaurant's glowing sign, crying. I was wrong. I turned. I know. I thought success meant becoming someone who didn't need you. I said nothing. She stepped closer. And now I realize I pushed away the one person who never wanted anything from me except to see me happy. My heart hurt. Because that was exactly what I'd wanted. But love isn't just about forgiving someone. Sometimes love means refusing to keep accepting the same wound. I handed her my wedding ring. Her eyes widened. Daniel, I still love you. She started crying harder. But I don't trust you anymore. I walked away. 3 months later, Melissa resigned from her position. She started therapy, not to win me back. She told me she needed to understand why she'd become someone she didn't recognize. I continued building my company. And 6 months later, Frank invited us both to the restaurant. Melissa arrived first. I came a few minutes later. She stood. I don't expect you to take me back. I nodded. Good. She smiled sadly. But I'd like to earn the chance to know you again. That sentence stayed with me. Because sometimes redemption doesn't begin with, I'm sorry. It begins with, I don't expect anything from you. We didn't immediately get back together. There were no magical promises. No instant forgiveness. We started with coffee, then dinner, then long conversations. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt what we'd destroyed. A year later, Melissa and I sat at that same restaurant. Frank walked over. Your usual table? Melissa laughed. I looked at her. She squeezed my hand. This time, she didn't call me a freeloader. She simply smiled and said, yes, please. And for the first time in years, the table didn't feel like a place where one of us had to prove their worth. It felt like home. Because sometimes the person everyone laughs at is the person quietly holding everything together. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. It's becoming strong enough to decide whether they deserve another chance. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.